Hi, and welcome to my podcast, Creative Full Time, where I interview actors and people in the entertainment industry about how they're doing the damn thing here in Canada. Now, before we get into the interview, if you could hit the subscribe button, you're all subscribed, I imagine. Please subscribe, it helps us out so much, and it doesn't cost you a damn thing. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to my 1-year anniversary party. That's so cool to me. Today's guest is Nicola Correia-Damude.
Damn, first try.
Ayo!
That never happens.
Thank you. Points. And she's got over 50 credits on IMDb. You've seen her in The Boys, Law and Order Toronto, SkyMed, My Spy, anything that's filmed here, really. Shadowhunters, so much. And today we're going to talk about all the things. I'm so excited to talk with you today. Thank you so much for saying yes
Thank
to
you for
this.
having me.
Oh my God,
it's so exciting.
My honor.
I love talking about all things to do with the work, and it's great to do it with other artists. It's
Yes.
an exciting thing to have other artists in the room while we do it.
100%. Did you always want to be, start the timer. Did you always want to be an actor?
Yes. I'm definitely one of those people. My dad's here in the audience today.
Shout out, Dad.
Shout out to Dad. So my dad was in the industry. His whole adult career was in various different parts of the industry. My mom's the opposite. My mom immigrated here because Canada needed nurses. So she ended up in Canada for that reason. After she's from Guyana, she went to the States first and ended up in Canada. So she was a nurse, and then she worked in pharmaceuticals. So she was the opposite, but was very supportive of it. And my dad always, when we were kids, that was the games we played. We're often drama games and singing games and anything artistic. It's the only thing I ever remember wanting to do. There were a couple of times in high school when I started to realize that there was a world that you had to make money in and stuff, where I panicked and was like, well, what else? But the other things were always things that were really out there or just not realistic. And the only thing I ever really wanted to do was act. Yeah.
Nice. I love how the other things were not realistic. It's always backwards. Oh God, I'm fired.
I guess what I mean is they were things that I knew I'm a firm believer. I remember one of my mentors in theater school said to me on the first day of theater school, she said to all of us, she said, if there's anything else you can possibly see yourself doing, do that. I think a lot of people said that to us when we're young. And I actually think it's really good advice because if you don't need it, then it's not likely to happen, because the need for it is the thing that will get you through the times that are really hard and really frequent, right? And for me, it was definitely a need. So the other things I wanted to do were things that would have required full focus. I like biology. I was like, what about a doctor? But you can't be a doctor and an actor. I'm sure there's someone out there who is, and that person would bug me no end.
She's here tonight.
She's up next. So that's what I mean by unrealistic is I knew I had to do this in some form, and the other things I was interested in were not things that would have allowed me to do both. So yeah.
Right. Nice. That's awesome. And let's just dive right into the hard stuff of this industry. It's my favorite part, really. When you started out in your career, what did you find was the hardest part in the beginning? Because it's going to be different now, right?
Oh, yeah. It's very, it's very different now. The world is very different now. And very rapidly, in my time as an artist anyway, so I've been doing this professionally for the 25 years now, and the landscape has changed drastically. In the beginning, there were a couple of things that were hard. The obvious ones, at least in my world, the obvious ones are racism and misogyny were the two big ones. And by misogyny, I'm mostly referring to issues of diverse body types and weightism and all that kind of stuff. So there was a very particular look. I grew up in the 80s and the 90s. You were white and you were blonde, or you were a maid or a prostitute. Those were your, you know what I mean? There was a very particular look. That was not something that we were even discussing varying from. There were very few options. So it wasn't even something that was presented as an option. It was always you're going to have to do a bunch of other stuff, right? But also it was just the industry, and it still is, but we had no sense of things like harassment even when I was coming up. So people would just sit you down and be like, well, you're too ethnic, you're brown, or you're clearly not white, so you're not you can't do this, you can't do this job, or you can't play this part. Or they'd be like, you're just too fat. And you'd be like, oh, well, okay. Or you're too tall, or like really weird. So there was a meanness to the industry that still exists, but there's a dialogue around it now. Whereas when I was coming up, it was like, it was accepted that that's what the art form was, that was an intrinsic part of it. And now I think we understand that, no, that's a problem with it. It's not a part of it, it's a problem with it, right? So that didn't really exist when I was coming up. So that I found very challenging, the constant negativity. And there just weren't opportunities. In hindsight, I see it as a blessing because it meant that my career took off when I was older and better able to enjoy it and handle it. So in some ways, looking back, but if I do think that a lot of the abuse that we suffered as young people in the time that I came up is undeniably, it's shaped certain parts of our lives undeniably, and that was really challenging.
Yeah, 100%. And you, as a biracial person, how is casting and your relationship with casting? Like, did you struggle with casting at all?
I mean, yes, and also it was just so commonplace. Like, now we deal with a lot of things, like there's a lot of lip service paid. Like I'm of the opinion that we haven't come nearly as far as people think we have. Like the numbers just do not bear out that we've made the progress that people say we have. It's not correct. If you look at the numbers of people actually playing large speaking roles in film and North American film and television, those people are white people for the most part, right? There are exceptions, for sure, more than there ever has been before, but in a way we have a bit of an exception that proves the rule situation. And again, statistically, it's just not true, right? However, we are in a place where you don't say it out loud anymore, right? So I would go into auditions and the feedback would literally be, yeah, we love her, but she's ethnic, so why did you send her in? And it was always words like ethnic, or they'd be like, well, she's just too Mexican, and you'd be like, I'm not Mexican. I don't even know anyone from Mexico. But it was like, I mean, I'm being a bit flip, but it was very much like, and I remember like my husband at one point, he, a brilliant actor, and he auditioned for a part once, and he's Latino, and the casting director literally just called his agent, and she was like, yeah, he's great, but he's Latino, he can't play the love interest. And it's like, yeah, because Latin guys have so much trouble with women, right? Like, yeah, that's certainly what the problem is, right? So, but there was just this, so, mostly it was just, it was just accepted. People didn't even, I think, see it as racism. It was just, and even in theater, because my career started out in theater, and there were some exceptions, but generally speaking, there was an idea that leading men and leading women still looked a very particular way in both theater and in film and television, and casting would often just say it. And there were times when you were almost relieved when they would just say it, because at least you knew it wasn't your work, and you knew, but it was, it was hard. I mean, but I also want to be very clear, and I try to be very clear about this whenever I talk about issues of race and diversity in our industry. The fact that I am an example of diversity in our industry, that's my dad, the whitest guy on the planet, right? So the fact, that's not a bad thing. It's just that, like, the fact that as a mixed person, and as someone who in my own culture is considered a white person, like in Caribbean culture, I'm a white person. Like, so the fact that I am always, I'm common, people will often use my name in talking about casting, about examples of diversity, and it's getting better. But for years, it was like and you're going like, there's your problem. I mean, if I'm your example, you have a problem already, right? So I do think that things are improving, but yeah, in the beginning, it was just, there was a line in the sand that simply existed for a lot of us. And we knew that line was there. And if you were lucky enough to have the resources and the support to keep going and wait for that door to open, then some of us got to step through it. But a lot of the artists who were as talented, as hardworking, as everything, as myself and a few of my other colleagues who were lucky enough to still be standing in the door when it opened, they had to stop because you couldn't make money. So you had to do something else, right? And it was just a matter of things changing in the culture and doors opening that happened eventually for some of us. Still hasn't happened for a lot of people in our community. But early, when I was coming up, it was just facts. It was just like, well, these are going to be your limitations. And they tell you that in theater school, or when you'd go to take acting classes. I'm sure this has happened to people here. You're taking acting class, and they do that horrible thing where they talk about what your hit was, which don't even get me started on the concept of a hit, because it goes against everything that we're supposed to be as actors, which is people who can morph and change and play different things. But they'd literally be like, well, so you look like this and you're this race and you're this height and you have this nose, so this is what you're going to be able to do, right?
Yeah.
And they taught you that in school, right? So it gave you a sense of what the world expected for you. It didn't mean that you couldn't achieve more, but you knew that it was going to have those limitations. And that was interesting. And it creates a weird dynamic with casting where no matter how nice you think they are, no matter how much they like you, that relationship wasn't able to build in the way that it was for other people, at least not in the beginning.
And when you have your agent, are these conversations that you have to have with your agent as well, of like how you want to be seen, how you want to be represented, that kind of thing?
Oh yeah, definitely. And I mean, I think it depends on how high your self-esteem is when you start this process. Mine wasn't great in my early 20s and in my teens when I was starting this process. I mean, I'm a big believer that you need to have a team, and I feel this about both my teams, like my team here and my team on the West Coast, like they're really people who I know will get behind me and go to bat for me, whatever I want to do. But not everyone is that lucky. There's a lot of people who want to control your career and want to, and again, like some people call that strategy. Other people call that controlling. And again, I'm not saying it depends on your relationship with your, but I mean, I remember like early in my career, like I was told I should change my name if I want, because my name was too ethnic.
Hey, I said it right.
Anytime, yeah, you said it right. But I should change my name because there was this idea, I was told that I could, if I dyed my hair blonde and wore whiter foundation, then maybe we could pass you and change your name, then maybe, so there's all these kinds of conversations. And they were just happening casually around meeting tables, and you're sort of going like, meanwhile your heart and your whole identity is just crushed, is getting crushed. But these were conversations that were definitely had early on. But then you'd meet that rare person, like I've been with both my teams for a long time, and I remember that the thing that made them different from the other people that I met with was that they were people who really liked me and my work and really believed that I had something that was special that had nothing to do with, didn't just have to do with the way I looked, or they didn't talk to me about hits. They didn't talk about wardrobe, right? Like I went into meetings where agents were like, well, if we're gonna go with the whole Latin thing, we're gonna have to lose the sweater and start wearing push-up bras. And these were meetings with professionals, and I'm going like, I don't wanna talk about that. I wanna talk about what kind of parts I can play and then when I met with the person, especially my rep out west, who I've been with for 20 years now, we just had our 20th anniversary, he sat down with me and was like, I wanna talk about your work. And I want to talk about what kind of parts you want to play. And he gave me this beautiful speech that was clearly so honest about how he didn't want anyone to just be able to get out of a cab and become an actor. Like he wanted you to have to love it and care about it. And those are the people that I think you need to have on your team. Because otherwise you're gonna crash or crumble in the hard times. Because you need people who actually believe in you and not just in what the image of you on a screen means to the current market or the current cultural, fads, whatever. They need to believe in you as a person and in your art form. And I was lucky enough to find that more than once. But yeah, all of those conversations in the early days were on the table. Yeah.
Amazing. And as you're progressing through your career and you're getting reoccurring roles and that kind of thing, are those conversations that you're having with your agent as well? Like, are you sitting down with them and saying, hey, I don't want to do any more one-liners, I don't want to do any more principals, now I want to do leading roles?
Oh, for sure. I think I think one thing that's hard to accept, if you're lucky enough to get to a point in your career where you have some choices, there is strategy to it, right? There just is. I feel like one thing that we have to get over, and it is a Canadian thing. I hate to say it, but it is a Canadian thing. You talk to American actors, they have a different culture around things like money and negotiations but I think we shy away as Canadian artists, and we're encouraged to shy away from it because it helps other people save money, right? We shy away from the nitty-gritty and the dark side of things like strategy. We see those as bad words. We're artists. We don't strategize and think about money. Of course we do, right? Because it helps you get more work. It helps you support yourself, right? So we have those conversations. In the early days, it was things like, at some point, it was like, okay, no more one-liners, right? Like, we've done 10 of those now, no more of those, or Then it was, okay, no more. I don't know, no more 1 episode or 2 episode recurrings. I can't remember exactly what the.
Yeah.
And then if you're lucky enough to get to a point where you have some financial negotiating power, then it becomes like, okay, only episodic rates and no day rates, or only day rates if it's this, and only. And I remember there was a point where it made me very uncomfortable. And now I've completely lost that discomfort, and I've gone in the other direction, because I realized that one of the things that's keeping us down, and particularly for people from historically marginalized groups, the fact that we're afraid to talk about money, and the fact that we think it's like, the only people who think it's taboo to talk about money are people with money, right? Because that's how they keep their money, is by the rest of us not wanting to ask, right? Or not wanting to ask for too much, right? So I started going to my male and white colleagues and being like, how much are you making on this? Like, we're playing the same size. And some people were like, this is making me very uncomfortable. I'd be like, okay. Other people would be like, yeah, absolutely. Like, I met a lot of great allies along the way who were like, yeah, you should be making what I'm making. You're not. And then I'd find out, wait a second, so I'm making 1/5 of what he is, and my part's bigger. I'm making 1/4 of what she is, and my part's bigger. And then there is more strategy to it even than that as Canadians, because we come at a discount, which is why people shoot here, right? So then you have to be able to talk to your agent about, like, all right, so we can't ask for the American money if you're doing a side contract, if you're doing an ACTRA contract, but I can give you a 50% discount and still be making a good amount, but I don't have to give you I don't have to give you like a 1/10, you know what I mean? Like, because a lot of the time, the average Canadian actor is often working for 1/10 of what their equivalent American colleague is making. And part of that is because it's part of why the work is here. And there is something to be said for understanding that. And it's why we offer tax credits. It's why our union, why we made changes that allow that to happen. But we don't have to continue allowing it to be quite that bad, right? And what I'm finding is that if I'm doing a Canadian show and they go, well, our budget, not a Canadian show, an American show in Canada, because most of my work is American, if I do a SAG contract, they just go, here's the offer. And usually you're like, no, that's great. With Canadian stuff, you tend to have to go like, well, okay, I know that my American counterpart is making this much money. I know that you don't have the budget for that, for Canadian. I know that, and that's true. But you have the budget to pay me 50% of that. I'm not going to take 1/10 of that anymore, right? So I think at every phase of your career, and then other days a project comes along and they don't have a budget and you really want to do it and you do it for $50 or whatever. I don't think you're allowed to do it for $50, but if you're a union member, but you know what I mean? Like, you do it because you want to. And so it's not that it's about money. I think a lot of strategy, professional strategy, comes down to reminding ourselves over and over again that knowing your value is not egotism. Knowing your worth, both monetarily, artistically, personally, knowing what you is not, it's not bragging, it's not thinking too much of yourself, it's being a professional in any other industry. You are encouraged to say, this is my worth and this is what I bring to the table. But somehow as actors, we're supposed to, especially as Canadian actors, and then you add any form of historical marginalization to that equation, and we're supposed to just be grateful to be invited. Yeah. And I was very grateful just to be invited for a number of years, and at some point I was like, I am grateful to be invited, and you're also lucky to have me. Both of us. Yes. I'm very lucky to be here. And you're also lucky to have me, and lucky to have my colleague here. Like, we're all very lucky to be doing what we do. But now, and you have to earn that as well. You can't walk in on your second show and be like, I want to be making top of the show. They'll laugh at you, and they should, because there is a process to it. But at some point, we have to acknowledge our own value if we want other people to do that. And let me be really clear. This came to me very late in my journey, right? Like, it came very late. It's only been the last, I'd say, 5 years that I've been able to embrace that attitude. But it's been very helpful to my life as an artist, because I no longer feel taken advantage of. I no longer feel, I feel more in control of emotionally in control as well, because I think one of the hardest things for actors that I don't even think we talk about enough is never feeling like you are in control of your artistry is so painful, right? Like, never, unless you're creating your own work. And not everyone, like, people always say, like, oh, why don't you write your own show? I'm like, being a writer is a talent. It's a skill. Yeah. It's something you work at. People's whole lives are being writers. it would be arrogance in the worst way for me to be like, I'm just gonna whip myself up a show. Like, some actors are writers, absolutely, and I envy you. I'm not a writer. For me, someone to suggest that I could go write myself a show, right? So never being able to control the art that we want to be a part of, or control that feeling. I'm not saying you can't, but that feeling is very hard on our hearts. And I think we need to be able to talk about that. Like, it's painful. And even people who are monetarily succeeding sometimes have a lot of pain around a lack of artistry that they feel, or a lack of fulfillment artistically that they're grappling with. Clearly mine's not voice work. But yeah, so I'm sorry, I don't remember what the original question was.
No, that's all right. You covered like 3 more topics. I love it.
Check, yeah, let's go down to the bottom of the page. Yeah.
You are a part of the ACTRA board as well, right?
The council, yes.
The council, yes. Why did you want to be a part of it?
So there are 2 things. The first was I was starting to work full-time in mostly American television. I'd started to ask these questions. I'd started to find out how little I was making compared to my American counterparts. I started to find out how much less we were making in Ontario than even in Vancouver in some cases, because the budgets are different from province to province, American companies. But so I started hearing about, and I started thinking like, we need to be talking about this more openly. So that was one thing that made me want to get involved at a higher level. The other thing was actually, it was COVID. So during COVID, I had a situation where I have a child, and he was out of school. He was going to have to be, in school at home. This was pre-vaccines, and I was very privileged to be offered 2 jobs when production opened, right away when production opened in August. Hugely privileged position to be in. But what became very clear to me was the Canadian job was one that would have kept me in town, could have been with my family, but it paid so much less, and there was no testing. There was no COVID testing. The standards at that point, they hadn't created the standards yet that we ended up having, the section, I think Section 21, that a lot of people did amazing work on. Whereas the CBS show I was offered was more money. We were tested every 2 days. We had PCR testing every 48 hours. And so I ended up going to Montreal and having to be away from my kid for like 5 weeks at one point. And I was like driving back and forth because I was afraid to fly. But I had to do that in order to make enough money and to feel safe, because the SAG rules were so much stronger than the ACTRA rules were. So that sounds like a criticism of ACTRA. In actual fact, what happened was the opposite, where I was being very vocal online, and I have, quite a large following because of my work, and I was making a whole lot of noise about how I felt about things and how we should all be fighting against things. Not actually doing any research into how our union worked, or just knowing that I was upset about things. So I got a call from, I got a message from the executive director of the Toronto chapter, and then from the president being like, we've heard about some of your posts, like, would you like to have a meeting so we can talk about some of your concerns? And it wasn't just COVID, it was a few things. And I was like, yeah, great, let's do it. And I sat down on a Zoom call with them, and I was so embarrassed at how little I actually knew about how our union worked, right? And some of the things I was complaining about were absolutely valid concerns that they were also concerned about, and things that it turned out were already in action. Like, we ended up getting testing, mandatory testing soon after that. It wasn't different, but basically what I also learned was I'd been complaining for a lot of years about things that I didn't understand. I hadn't educated myself on how it worked. I also wasn't aware of how much things like Ontario labor law, how much national and provincial laws affect our ability as a union to function. So some of the things that I was complaining about were actually things that we have no control over at all as a union. And I realized that member education and this is true no matter what union you belong to, it's really easy to complain about something that you actually haven't participated in. And I had not participated in my union other than collecting my checks and expecting things to run smoothly. So at that point, and also for me, the BIPOC conversation wasn't, the representation wasn't there on council for a long time, and they were aware of that, and they wanted to change that. And the hair and makeup grievance came soon. I was on the bargaining committee that I was one of the people who was in the room with the producers talking to them in the IPA negotiations about the hair and makeup grievance. For anyone who doesn't know what that is, the hair and makeup grievance was basically us saying to the producers, you have to put in our IPA that whoever you have doing hair and makeup absolutely must be trained in black hair and makeup, and they have to be able to show that they can do a multitude of different races hair and makeup, because that wasn't happening. And the abuses that particularly black women, but Latin women, Asian women as well, were suffering because they're hair and makeup artists, and the humiliation and the heartbreak that was causing. So that was the other thing that I really wanted to be able to say to the next generation of women coming up after me that I wanted to be more visible for them. And I think a lot of us felt that way. And that year, the first year I was on council, was the first and only time that we've had a 50-50 council, where it was 50% people of color and 50% white members. And that was the first time in history. And it's only happened that one time, but we're working on getting that back.
Wow, amazing. Well, good for you for taking that on, because it sounds like work. It sounds like a lot of work.
It is work. It is work. But I think we all, like, a big part of my journey in this industry has been realizing that the limitations that you're told you have are either, they don't have to be true. Sometimes they are. They're not always true. They're also very contingent on shifts in things like culture, on shifts in law, right? So for example, like, we need to get the message out more that, like, there was a saying, I can't remember exactly how it was some horrible thing that people used to say to you, but it basically boiled down to, if you were a woman, they'd say, don't turn 30 and don't have a baby. So basically, don't get pregnant and don't tell anyone once you turn 30, right? That was literally, people would say that very flippantly, like, oh, well, how old are you? Oh, no, don't, and definitely don't. So don't turn 30. No, first of all, don't turn 30 and don't have a baby, if you want to talk about those bizarre advice anyone could ever give you. But there was this idea that your career ended at that point. And that was true for a long time, but it didn't have to be true, right? And I'm someone whose career took off when I was 33 with a newborn. I got my first really big American job that changed my career when I was 33, breastfeeding a 2-month-old baby at, I think I was 185 pounds. Not that that matters, but in terms of what you were supposed to look like on TV, and it was partially because the American market needed more Latinos, needed more black women, needed more diversity, needed more people of color, and was saying to the Canadian market, you either find us these people or we can't shoot here. So all of a sudden the door swung open, like I was saying earlier, and I happened to be lucky enough to still be standing in that door when it opened, right? But in fact, I'm not the only one whose career took off much later, and had we given up when we were told to give up. So circling back to the ACTRA thing, I think a big part of, we talk about representation in some very particular areas, but part of representation too is reminding people that this timeline that we're told about when we're training does not actually, it's a fabrication that only exists as long as we uphold it, right? Like, it changes when we dismantle it. It's not a fact. It's it's something that we've created. It means we can take it apart, right? And I think sometimes that can only be done if we're speaking very loudly about it. And I thought that from ACTRA Council would be a place where I could help speak loudly to those issues.
Amazing. Yeah. That's awesome. Round of applause. That's awesome. And speaking of speaking loudly and your social media and the effect that you have online, you're very open and honest on your social media. I love that about you. And something that you talk about a lot is your history of eating disorders and body image issues and that kind of thing. And I like that you talk about it and how it still affects you. I think one of the narratives that, like, the only narrative really that I've heard is you have it when you're young, and then if you get over it, then, like, that's it, and you're good for the rest of time. And that's the only narrative that I've ever heard, but you talking about it openly is amazing. So I just wanted to ask, like, when it does show its face, what are some things that help you get through it?
That's a very good question. Yeah, I mean, first of all, my self-esteem is much better than it was when I was younger, but that doesn't mean that my eating disorder has necessarily gotten that much better, right? Because it's something that's been with me since I was young, and in our industry, there's a point where I remember saying this, I forget when, but I said it out loud and then went, oh, that's exactly what it is. There's a point where the industry, and it's not just the industry, it's cultural, and it doesn't just exist in our industry. It's a whole big world cultural thing. There's a point where people beat you down enough and they diminish you enough that they don't have to do it anymore. You'll start doing it to yourself. And that's true control. And that's something that's been enacted on women for generations, right? So it's race, it's body image, it's gender, it's sexuality. If you're told for long enough that there's something wrong with you, eventually people can stop saying it and you'll just do it yourself, right? And that's how people who really know how to wield power with evil intent do it, right?
Yeah.
They make sure that you control your prison's up here now, right? They don't have to do it anymore. And I think eating disorders work like that. So it got to a point where, I mean, no one, because I also had a rule, it got to a point in my career where I was like, all right, if anyone from casting has a comment on my weight, or if any producer wants me to lose weight, just don't give me the offer. I just don't want to hear, and my team's agreed to that. So I was like, I don't want to deal with that anymore. So as far as I am aware, and I think I did ask at one point, and the culture's changed a bit, so I don't think it happens as much, but as far as I'm aware, it's been almost 10 years. It'll be 10 years next year since anyone actually commented on my body in this industry. It'll be almost 10 years. But I still do it. I still worry about it. I still assume they're thinking it. I still try and change myself when I get a job that I think they want that for. No one's saying it anymore. I'm doing it to myself, right? And it's also a world of comparison that we live in, right? So for the first time in the last 2 years, I'm doing shows where there are other women who look like me, where there are other women of my body type. Also, again, like the race thing is one thing, but in the real world, I'm a very average sized woman. It's only on TV that I'm like, you know, that people are like, oh, you're such an inspiration because of your size. And you're going like, have you seen normal people? Like, right. like, and any other, like, so it's like, and it's part of the thing that like, it becomes an awkward thing, not awkward. It's a challenging thing for me sometimes when people pay me compliments in that area, because it's so touching, and I'm glad that it helps them, but it's also, again, proof of the problem, right? Mm-hmm. So I've had people come up to me on set and go, you know, it just means so much to me to see someone your size on TV, and I'm like, that's great. I'm so glad that you feel that way. Also, though, yeah, I don't say that to this person who's being vulnerable with me, but also the fact that a size 10 woman is like, you know, it's like you've seen an alien step out of a spaceship is like a huge problem, right? Yes. And we're starting to see a little bit, that's getting better, but for years I was the biggest one. I was the least white and the largest, with few exceptions, on a number of shows that I did. More with body type than with race. It was more of a body, and so I was always comparing myself to them. And in every photo, I was 3 inches taller. And it's that child brain of wanting to, you know, I do think there's this instinct that we have to want to fit in, right? And anyway, so all that to say that the best example would be recently I did a show where it was I play a lot of regulars. I hadn't played a lead on TV in a few years. I've only played I usually play regulars and recurrings. But it was my first lead on TV in a few years, and I was the oldest actor. The next oldest woman after me was about 13 years younger than me. Most of them were, I'm 43, most of them were also, yes, we should be talking about our ages. We should not be told not to say how old we are, because there's nothing wrong with being 43. So I am 43 years old. It's on the internet. Go check it out. But and most of them were 25, literally 25, and amazing, wonderful human beings. But I became very aware of being older, of being bigger, of not having the body type, and I went down this rabbit hole, and I was dieting again, and I was like crash dieting and then binging, and I was body checking all the time. Anyone who has an eating disorder knows what that is. If you don't, it's like constantly looking at yourself and judging yourself, and I went way down that rabbit hole, and no one had said a word to me. In fact, I found out later that like they had wanted me for this part long before it ever even crossed my desk. Like they wanted me. I wasn't comfortable with me. I wanted to look like them, right? It's my problem now. And I think, don't get me wrong, women who don't fit a certain mold still don't play the number one for the most part. There are exceptions, but it's the same thing with men. There's still a pretty particular look for number one and number two on most North American series. British television is slightly different, but so that's still true. But beyond that, things have opened up more. So in those situations where I realize that I'm going down the rabbit hole and I'm hurting myself and I'm going into a bad place, interestingly, one thing that was very freeing was I will usually do a post about it. And I know there are people who are like, especially people my age who are like, why do, because, I'm not old, but technologically I'm pretty old. You know what I mean? Like I got my first cell phone when I was 23 and that was like, I was born in 1981. So this whole idea of like putting your whole life on the internet isn't something that I necessarily, I think is healthy in some ways. But for me, publicly saying I'm struggling with this, publicly saying this is happening right now, particularly because I know I have all of these followers on social media who I know some of them are going to be looking at me, comparing themselves to me, and they tell me this when I meet them at fan conventions and stuff. Oh, I wish I was like you. And I was like, you don't know what's actually going on. You see me in makeup and hair, and you see me talking about, people ask me questions about my career. You don't see when I'm at home, like literally at times in my life, like taking laxatives and exercising until I almost, because I have such I have an illness. I have a mental health issue, which is a lack of love for my body that so many of us suffer from. And I have taken a lot of comfort in sharing that. It also keeps me accountable, right? If I suddenly go down the rabbit hole and drop 30 pounds, there's hundreds of thousands of people who are going to go, what happened to you?
Yeah.
Like something's wrong because you've told us that you have this problem. So in a weird way, it also forces me to make sure that I'm doing things for the right reason. There's nothing wrong with gaining or losing weight. You do what you want to do, right? But we're all vulnerable in our industry to these pressures. We're all vulnerable to sitting in front of that mirror for the 2.5 hours it takes to look like we look on TV and starting to go, and again, do what you want to do. But if you're doing it for the wrong reasons, that's when it becomes a problem. And for me, talking about it makes me more accountable to myself, because I now owe it to these little girls and these women who I have said I'm struggling with this, to not just show up one day and go, oh, I just started eating more broccoli, when in actual fact I've been on Ozempic or something. You know what I mean? And again, I don't care if you take Ozempic, that's your business. But then come out and say, I'm feeling so bad about myself, or I'm feeling so that, like, let's just be honest about it. Yeah. And the more honest that I am about my struggles, the more I'm able to get myself back on track, because I'm now responsible to people who I know look up to me, or not even look up to me, but to people who are following my journey because they relate to it. Yeah. And if I'm not honest with them, then I'm breaking that pact that I have with them, that I've made with them, to be honest and to be genuine. And there's things I don't share. There's parts of my life that I do not talk about. And because I don't think that people can expect us to be honest about everything, but this is something I've chosen to share, and so I'm going to be honest with you about it. And it helps me great. So that's actually like the main thing I do is I'll usually talk about it publicly, so I get it out there. I'm going through a rough time with this. I'm back on this in this problem. I then usually get a lot of really beautiful messages from people that remind me that I'm not alone, right? And that people all over the world are feeling this way. And then I also have a great therapist, have a great naturopath, have great friends who, will go like, I think you're getting a little, so speaking about it honestly, therapy, and also just trying to be less hard on myself. Like these things, especially in an industry like ours, you're going to feel this way. So let's just talk about it and let's take the stigma off of it. And so I that's actually the most helpful thing for me.
Amazing. Yes. I love that. That's awesome. I love, follow her on social media. The social media is fantastic. 2 more questions I want to ask you before I open it up to the audience. I just wanted to ask you about, we were talking earlier about you did some Canadian projects. You have Law & Order coming out, and what was the other?
SkyMed.
And then SkyMed, the Untamed was the American one that you did.
Yeah, it's Netflix.
And you were talking about the Big Fish, Small Pond, and then going to do this American project and how that was different. Let's talk about that experience.
That was really weird, and my dad, who's here, will remember this day. So I'm 43 years old. I've done 40 TV shows or something, and parts of all different sizes. And I got this one job, and I got there and I just panicked. I just got so nervous. And at 43 years old, I called my dad in Toronto from out west and was like, for my trailer, and I was like, I'm so nervous. And I suddenly got so nervous after all these years. And I realized that there were a couple of things that were happening. So one is, there's no ceiling on what we do, right? So meaning that no matter what height you achieve, there's a reason that you rarely hear actors go like, yeah, I've done all the stuff I wanted to do, I'm gonna pack it up now. Like, you don't hear that very often. I think art in general has no ceiling. It's part of who we are. It's something that and the ceiling isn't about money or fame. Like, I think that's a misconception. People are like, oh, well, then you get the blockbuster, then you do the Marvel movie. For a lot of people, if you talk to a lot of actors who've reached that level, the Marvel movie isn't what they consider the ceiling. The ceiling was when they got to do that really intimate film with an actor they'd admired their whole lives, or, you know what I mean? So the ceiling can be whatever your ceiling is, but it gets higher and higher. And one thing that I thought that I think is interesting is, yes, as you get further in your career, like now there's certain sets I'll walk onto where I just feel very comfortable and where I feel confident and comfortable, and I know a lot of the people, and I feel good about the role, and I know I can do the job, and I know they know I can do it, and I just have a great time, and it's great. And then you'll get a job where something about it will just freak you out, no matter how long you've been doing it, you know? And in this case, I think it was a couple of the actors that I was working opposite were actors that I really admired. And I admired them not just because, I admired them because of their work, right? And because of their, the shows that they've done, the work it was also American producer who made some of my favorite shows, right? And it's like I got to set, I was fine, I flew out there, no problem. It wasn't even the biggest budget show I've ever done, but I got there and the call sheet landed in front of me and I suddenly saw all the names just lined up there on the sides that they give you when you get into the trailer. And I saw all the names in a row, and I went, and I just had this moment where I got so nervous. And all I can say about it is that in a way it was scary. On the other hand, it was this great reminder that, and when I say big fish, small pond, again, it's not even about money or the size of the project. It's like, there's ponds, I guess that metaphor gets tired really fast, but like there's gonna be work that you do that you feel very comfortable in. And then there's gonna be work that for one reason or another, and sometimes it's like, like now when I do Canadian shows, I know a lot of the crew, or I know, I've worked with the producers before because there's fewer who are making the bigger stuff. So I know them, and so there is that feeling of like, they know that I can do my job because they've seen me do it. So then I go to a show like this with an American producer who doesn't know me and who hasn't seen my stuff, and suddenly you're like, oh my God, all of a sudden you go, oh, if I have a bad day, my name doesn't mean anything to them, right? Like, they like my audition, but it's not like, it's not like here where someone goes, oh yeah, I know her and I know her. Like, if I screw this up, if I have a bad day, if I freak out, or I have a panic and I can't do it in my however it takes I'm allowed, this could they'll think I'm not good at my job. And it was really weird, and it was a bit scary. But it also made my work, I think, a bit more interesting, or at least different. It made my process different because I approached it again. It was like I went back to old versions of my process that I took comfort in. And in some ways, I took fewer risks, but I also delved deeper, if that makes sense, right? So it was an interesting, yeah. But I think the point is that no matter how, and I've worked with actors, like I remember working with, he's now one of the biggest celebrities in the world. And I remember he'd never done a kissing scene. And I was so intimidated. And he was sitting next to me, and he's like this major superstar. And somehow had never done it. And he, at one point, we were cut and we were sitting next to each other. And I'm like no one at this point. And he's like, can I ask you something? And I'm like, yeah. And he's like, he's a huge guy. Have you had to kiss someone on camera before? And I was like, yeah. And he was like, is it weird? I'm really nervous. And I was like, what? And I almost like, I didn't do that. I was nicer than that. I was like, sure, let's talk about it. But I was like, I can't believe that you're asking me, like, you're you. And I mean, again, like to say you're you and I'm me, like that's such a weird low self-esteem thing, but it's just facts. Like but he was so nervous because that was something he'd never done, right? I also once worked with a very famous, and I only say famous because you assume that they're gonna have this self-esteem, but a very famous dramatic actor who was doing his first comedy. And he knew that it was one of my first comedies. And he was like, in between, he was like, oh my God, I'm so nervous. I've never done comedy before. Like, these guys are so funny. I don't know how to improv. They keep improving. What do I do? And I was looking at him going, like, I would have thought at his point that he'd just be like, let's do it, right? But he was so nervous. And I think that's what's great about what we do, is you will never have done it all, right? Yeah. There's no point when you'll have finished, you know? Right. And so, yeah, it's been an interesting few years that way, because I feel like in the last few years, in any given year, I'll do something where I'm the smallest fish, and then I'll do something where I'm the biggest fish, and then I'll do something where I'm something in the middle. And from country to country, when you're working in different countries too, and people have different relationships to the job that you do, and you start to find yourself in the art in your different roles as an artist. Not roles as in characters, roles as in who am I in these different parts of my work, right?
Amazing. Yeah. That's incredible. And one last question I want to ask you is, how have your dreams changed as you've moved through your career?
Oh, what a good question.
Well, thank you.
Oh my God. I mean, it's funny. There was a time in my life when my dream was just to walk into an audition room and actually know that I was being considered. Like, I think for some of us, dreams change a lot, right? Like, there was a point in my career, we used to call it being the alternate, where you'd have it would be a room full of white women who looked very similar, and then they'd have one either black or Hispanic girl come in, and just so they could say they did it. And you'd walk in, you'd prepare, and you'd prepare, and you'd prepare, and then you'd walk in and you'd go, oh, I'm the alternate. And you'd know that, right? And you'd be like, oh, well, okay. So there was a time in my life when my dream was just to actually be in the room with a chance at it, right?
Yeah, I felt that.
Right? And then when that happened for me, and I knew that when I went in the room I had a chance, then the dreams sort of changed. So then and I feel like maybe they change every year. Like 1 year, at one point it's like, I want to be playing, I want to be recurring. So I don't just want a guest star. And then, I'd love to be a regular. And then I'd love to be a regular who has my own storyline, right? Instead of a regular who's supporting a lead. And then I'd like to, so there's those kinds of dreams. But then I find as I get older, there's another level of dream that's slightly different, which is, I'm a mom. I am getting to a point in my life where I'm realizing that I spent the first 30 years of my life, for as long as I can remember, maybe even longer. I remember 12 is around the age where I started really being worried about my career because I wanted this so badly. And I forgot at many points in my life that there was more that was just as important, right? And I've defined myself through my work for most of my life. And then I have my son, and one of the things that I think is not true, you'll hear people say oh, once you have a child, you don't care anymore about your career, you only care about your child. I think that's bullshit. That was certainly not my experience. I love my child more than anything in the world. That's true. But if anything, I wanted the work more. I needed the work more because I needed to have that other part of myself. It didn't get less important, is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
But the more I work at, I don't like, not higher level, bigger budget things, the more I work with people who make more money than I could ever dream of, who have more fame than a lot of us could ever dream of, the more I see that a lot of them aren't happier than me, or you, or that guy, right? And they wouldn't say that they were. They don't pretend. Have you ever actually heard a celebrity or a famous actor ever on TV go I am happier than the rest of you? No. We assume that, right? They don't tell us that. We assume that because we think we want what they have, right? But then I started working with people who were working 16-hour days, 5 days a week, being a lead in a movie. Their kids are in another country. They haven't seen their kids in 5 months. They have 3 nannies, and they spend every minute that they're not working with their kids, and they haven't seen their parents. I have friends whose parents passed away, and they hadn't seen them in years because they just simply couldn't keep their contract, or they were in contracts again. And again, none of that is to judge any of that, right? There's no right or wrong. It's just that now my dreams have shifted into something where I'm my dream is no longer all about work. There's moments where I actually think that my dream is just about Like right now, if I could make a living as an actor and still be present for my son and my parents and have a life where I like myself even when I'm not working, that's a big dream for me. My dream is more personal now, but it is professional, because that will also mean that I've developed a healthier relationship with my career, right? When I like myself, even when I'm unemployed, when I like myself, even when, I'm not getting what I want, or not, you know what I mean? And it's a privilege. Obviously, I understand it's a privileged position to be in, to say that that's my dream, but I think it's important to adjust our dreams as we move along. And so, someone asked me recently, like, so what's the next job you want? If you could pick any job in the world, what would the next job be? And they were like, you probably want your own show, right? That's the next step. And I think talking about things like steps is a fool's errand. There's no steps in this. This industry has no steps, right? And on one hand, sure, like, who are we kidding? If someone offered me my own show tomorrow, I'm not gonna be like, let me think about it. Like, of course, I wanna have that experience if someone offers it to me, but I'm also aware now that if they don't, there's something else I'm gaining from that. I'm gaining time with my son. I'm gaining the chance to do this theater workshop that a friend of mine, I miss theater, and I get to spend more time with my parents. I get to be there as my nieces who live downstairs grow up. Like, there's all of these things so for me, balance and not defining myself by my career is my next goal. I also really dream of not having to worry about I would love to 5 years from now, not be as fearful as I am now of how getting older is going to affect my career. Mm-hmm. I dream of believing. Can you dream of believing? I dream that I will come to believe that my value as an artist doesn't have to end because of something like age, or something like size, or something like race, and all those things. And I should believe that, because I was told I'd never have any of this in the first place. So there's no reason why I shouldn't believe that the rest can happen as well. So that's the next part of the dream, is settling into that belief and just hoping that it's true.
That's amazing. That was a great answer. I love that. We're going to make that a reel on Instagram, everybody. I wanted to open it up to the audience for a moment. Does anybody have any questions?
They're like, what could we ask? She talked about everything.
Yes.
Thank you, first of all. That was awesome. It's super amazing to hear everything about your journey and your wisdom. It's amazing.
Thank you.
I was just curious about that moment that you were talking about when you were 33 and a baby, and then you had this big role. I was wondering about if you could tell us a bit about that story, and a bit about maybe the audition, or maybe it feeling like the synchronicity just lined up, and tell us a bit about maybe how you approached that audition, and then on set what you did that sort of shifted things for you.
Yeah, no, that's a really great question. I remember it vividly. So my son was, the show is a show called Shadowhunters, and I'd played a recurring on The Strain, which was a big step forward for me. That was a big career, that was a big one for me. But it was a recurring, and it was 1.5 seasons kind of thing. And then I got pregnant, and literally I was like, oh, well, I guess that's it then. Like, literally, that was the attitude at that point. Everyone was like, oh, that's too bad. And then what's fascinating is that once I have my son, one of the interesting things about having kids, and I don't think it has to just be about having kids, and this is something I think we all need to just maybe sit down and have more conversations about, because people always talk about it as something that happens to parents, but I actually think it's a mindset thing as artists. We make our work and our art our number one thing because I think that's natural. It's part of who we are. But if it's our only focus, then it's almost like it becomes so precious that we can break it too easily, right? It's so precious that it's too easy to drop, and we start to get, I'm laboring that metaphor, but you know what I'm saying? Like, we get panicky. So what was interesting with that audition was my son was 3 months old, maybe 4 months old at that time. Started shooting when he was 6 months old. So he was 4 or 5 months old. I was breastfeeding. I was shooting nights on The Strain and was sleeping 2-3 hours a night tops. And this audition came, and it was like 15 pages or something. And I had a colicky baby. And I was just like, and I remember thinking, oh, I wish I'd got this audition when I could do it properly. You know what I mean? But the irony is that I didn't have time to worry about whether or not they were going to like me. I didn't have time to make too many choices. I didn't have time to rehearse it too much. Like, I did the best I could. But and then I had to get home right after. Like, I literally had to, like, you know, plug my boob in like 10 minutes after the thing, right? Or drive home or whatever. So I went in. I remember getting in there. I remember the guy who answered the door. I remember the elevator opened. I remember every minute of it. The elevator opened. The guy was standing there. We went over. We did the scene. We did scene 2. We did scene 3. Thank you very much. Great. I left. I got in the car. The rest is a blank, because then I went back to what my life was at that point. And then I got the call that, and in hindsight, I think one of the great gifts of becoming a mother for me, but I don't think it has to be just about that. I think it can be about anything else that you're passionate about, that you throw yourself into, relationship, hobby, other art form, job, family, whatever. As soon as you have something that you care about more, then your artistry is allowed to breathe. You're not strangling it with your panic, right? And I no longer had the time to sit around and beat myself up about why nobody wanted me and why nobody liked me and why I was fat and useless and everybody hated me. Because that's, you know, I'm obviously exaggerating, but it's like those spirals we all go down, right? And then the job started, and it was all these lovely young people. And I remember, like, the first day I was in a trailer that had no fridge and I had to pump. And I remember being like, oh my God, it was my first day. And the kid who was playing my son was this, like, super hot. He's now one of my best friends. Love him. He tells the story all the time. We met because I was like, excuse me, hi, I play your mom. I was 33 playing a 28-year-old's mom. Welcome to Hollywood in the early 2000s. That's what happened. And he was like, I was like, I'm Nicola. And he was like, oh yeah, great to meet you. And I was like, can I put my breast milk in your fridge? And I remember he went, yes, ma'am, please, right this way. And he and he was like, just come in. But again, it was like, I didn't have time to worry about if they thought I was cool or hot or whatever. I just had to get home. But then when I was in the work, I was so happy to be doing the work, right? Because I didn't have time for it anymore. And that's something that I've tried to take with me. Don't get me wrong, I was nervous tonight, but I just didn't have the time to worry about it as much. And I'm going to share something with all of you that there's teachers and coaches and people who are about to freak out and be like, why is she saying this? But this is true for me. With auditioning, I stopped memorizing lines. About 2 years ago, I started working with a reader. My husband and I read for each other. And it happened during pilot season, and we had a kid. And, you know, during pilot season, and those roles aren't even up for grabs. Those roles are cast already, as most of us know, right? You get an audition for number 1 or number 2 during American pilot season, and you're auditioning as an ACTRA member. If you're auditioning as a SAG member, it's different. From Canada, if you're doing a tape as a SAG member, but those roles were cast to secure funding. Like, those are just auditions that they have to do as part of an agreement, right? But if you don't do them well, it reflects badly on you with casting. It means you won't be, and there's a reason, just sidebar, there's a reason to do those auditions, right? Like my part in The Boys. I auditioned for the role that was played by Academy Award nominee Elizabeth Shue. You know, so clearly that was not going to be, but because of that audition, I gave it my all, and because of that audition, I got the audition to play the recurring role that I ended up getting, and I ended up doing 3 seasons, right? So those auditions are worth doing. It's just that I was starting to get resentful of the time and money that was going into things that I knew were not actually going to happen. And there's a resentment that builds up, I think, after a while, where we start feeling like we're banging our heads against the wall. So one day during pilot season, we didn't have time, and we were like, you know what? We each had 2 18-page auditions to do by the next morning, and we were like, let's just try this. And my husband took out his phone and put it next to the iPhone and just started, like, he's like, let's see if you can use this as a teleprompter. Now people do this more. This was before this was something that, and it worked beautifully. And I was able to rattle off monologues because the lines were right there. And I realized that I was actually acting way better. You can't do this in person, obviously. This is only if you're doing tapes. I don't recommend this in person. Don't ask your reader to scroll for you. There are tricks to do similar things if you're in person if you have to, right? Like Clipboard's your best friend, as we all know. You got to have a good clipboard and a good folder. For 90% of characters have a reason to carry a clipboard or a folder. I'm just going to say it, right? Or I'm old, or an iPhone, or an iPad. But anyway, and so I stopped, unless it's in person, for the most part. I mean, I do the work. I read the script and I make some choices. But for the most part, I don't memorize the lines. And my booking doubled, then tripled in 2 years. Because, I'm not saying I don't do work, I'm saying that I don't worry about the memorization piece. Because again, it frees me from having to hold on to choices and having to worry about the lines. Because so often we're grabbing for lines in long auditions. We're not playing the beat we want to play because we're afraid we're going to forget the line, right? So it frees me up that way. It took the resentment out of auditioning for me. And suddenly I could just be like, I'd have fun with it. And then I'd be like, well, that's the best I can do today because now I got to go to work or now I got to go pick up my kid. And it's made it joyful for me in a way that auditioning never was before. And that's my way. Your way might be different, but I really think that we have to stop. There's that really hackney thing that they say in school, like tools, not rules. And it's like, it's a lame thing that your teacher tells you when you're in university, but it's also true, right? Like, you got to do what works for you. And for me, I am doing way better work when I don't put that energy into memorizing lines and I put that energy into enjoying myself in the moment and to maybe going to the gym or doing the fun thing that morning instead of sitting there hammering it, because then I go in and for me, that helps. So that audition, to go way back to your question, that show was the beginning of that, the emergence of that part of my process. Now, obviously, if you're actually doing a job, you can't do that. You have to be absolutely 100% memorized, word perfect every time. And then if you're lucky enough to have some leeway, great. But so it doesn't work when you're on set. But it does create a new sense of joy around the everyday life of an actor for me. That's been really helpful. I swear to God also, people are more interested when you are just enjoying yourself. It's just true, right? And when you don't feel such sadness. I used to finish audition tapes and just feel depressed because I was like, this isn't my best work. And of course it's not your best work. Of course it's not, right? So fuck it then. Like, have a little more fun with it. Say whatever just change the word. Like, you know what I mean? Like, you have to be professional, but find a way to bring the joy back. And that job was the beginning of that. Yeah.
Amazing. We have time for one more question if anybody has one. Going once. Going to, in the back.
Hi. This has been a really great interview, so thank you for sharing your stories with us.
Thank you.
It felt very affirming. I love it. So my question is, you mentioned that earlier in your career when they weren't really looking for diversity, it was hard to sort of network and build relationships. Now that there are some changes and work is being done, do you feel like it's improved? Like, do you feel like sort of independent actors on the come up can meet people who are making decisions and get roles that way, or do you think the audition is still the ultimate decider?
Really great question. So this is one of those situations where every actor you ask is going to have a different answer based on their experience. I think networking is great. I think networking is great sometimes if for no other reason than we need to be honing the skills of how we constantly have to interact with new people and put our best face forward, because especially as Canadian actors, being nice, easy to work with, personable, and someone who brings light into a room will often be why you get the job over someone else, because that is part of our role as Canadian actors, is to make things easier, right? You can say that sucks if you want to, it's facts, right? So, and not in every show, but in a lot of shows. So networking, I think, is a great skill to have. At the end of the day, there's a process that is entrenched in the work that we do. So if you want to work in television, for example, in my opinion, if you want to work in television, I would suggest that your energy is better put in finding an agent who can get you in the right room and developing relationships with casting directors. So no matter how bizarro land, you get those auditions sometimes and you're like, this is wrong. If they ask you to do it, and you do it really well, right? Because you're not auditioning for that job, you're auditioning for the 15 other shows that casting director is going to be doing next year, right? At the end of the day, casting is done, for the most part, in the casting room or by tape that is made in the casting room. There are going to be times when, for example, you meet a director or producer at a networking event, and then something will come up, and then they might think of you. But if your tape doesn't come across their desk, you're more likely to get it, in my opinion, if their tape goes across their desk and they go, oh, I met that woman at a TIFF event, or oh, I met her, but you still have to have your tape in the mix, right? You still have to be on casting's list. There are always exceptions. We all have a friend who got a job because they met a guy at a bar who had a little whatever, right? We all have that friend. And good for that friend, right?
We love and hate them.
We love and hate them, right? We all have that friend. But at the end of the day, so for me, I mean, I tend to think, I'm not a big events person for various reasons, but I think more of the networking happens if you're on set, right? Even if you're doing background work, if you're a PA, if you're interacting in a set, that is when you make an amazing impression on the director, on the writer. Writers are in that casting process, right? On everyone, on the ADs who are going to be directing their project next year, right? So, but my personal opinion, to be totally honest with you, I think that if you're not in the room, the networking is not going to matter as much. So if you can go to as many parties and meet as many people as you want, and that can be great for you as a person. It can be great for your exposure to some degree, but your tape has to be going across their desk. So I would say the first thing to do is put energy into making sure your agent has the connections to casting to get you into that room, to get your tape submitted, and then to make sure that when you're in that casting room and doing that tape, it's fucking great. Can we swear on this? I forgot to ask. Okay.
Yeah, 100%.
And this is the other thing, is that having just said what I said about me needing to find joy in it again, your tape still has to be fucking great, right? The competition is way too high. So if you think there might be holes, and this isn't what you asked, but just extrapolating, if what's going to matter is, like, if you've done 8-10 auditions for a cop role, for example, and you're not even getting a call back, I would say find a coach that you trust and find out if you're missing a piece of the puzzle. You might just be missing one small piece of that puzzle. It might be that you're talking too loud. It might be that you're not doing the gravel and whisper enough for the genre. It might be that, like, some little technical thing. Gravel and whisper meaning the way we talk on TV, where we don't talk like that the whole time. So it could be some small little thing, right? So those are the things that I think are real investments. Not that networking doesn't have a place, but if your tape isn't in the running, then if your tape's not in the mix, then you can't get the part. So I would focus on that and then go meet all the people as well, right? But yeah, I do think you need to be in the room.
Well, thank you so much for this interview. It's been so lovely to talk to you. I could talk to you for hours. Thank you so much for watching this interview. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. And if you haven't subscribed, please do that. Like, share, comment your favorite takeaway below in the comments, and I'll see you in the next interview. And that's a wrap. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. That was so great.